everybody? Wesley, Shoemaker, Aaron Parker, back today with another episode of the Blue Gold Sports Podcast. Yes, we admit it has been a little while since we last have talked, but we are back for the summer, back in full swing, going forward for the remainder of 2023. Obviously, the big news of the year, I'll say, is Bob Huggins is no longer the head men's basketball coach at West Virginia University. This comes after he was arrested for driving under the influence in Pittsburgh on Friday evening. And this is not his first incident this offseason, which I think was probably the nail in the coffin. So just your overall reaction, we'll start with that, Aaron, just to Hugs' legacy, I guess, but also him no longer being on the sidelines with the stool come November.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate how presumably his career ended, but it happened the way it happened, and you can't fault the university after the first mistake in keeping him when he was already on thin ice. Doing something like this, you can't fault them for wanting to move on. It's just really a shame how this career has ended. He spent 15 plus years at his alma mater, the place he loves, wanted so badly to bring a national championship to the state. Nobody got it more than Hugs. The understanding of what it means to be a Mountaineer, to coach the Mountaineers, and to represent our state, to represent the 1.8 million. So he is disappointed. I am disappointed, as the rest of the fan base and the university is. But you got to move forward in whatever capacity that is. And it's going to be fast. But I do have faith in Ren Baker and the university at this point. But it's going to be a tough hire.
Yeah, for me, it's sort of odd to see him go, right? Because when you probably thought to yourself, how is his career going to end? You thought of basically they're going to roll out every single red carpet you could for him. They're probably would have given him a statue, named the court after him, done some sort of big thing or multiple big things when he eventually called it quits. And I think I even might have sent you a text, Aaron, but as soon as I heard about this, you kind of figured it was the end of the road. Two incidents within 2 months, and neither is good in the slightest. Let's not try and act casually about what he was doing. He could have hurt himself, or he could have hurt other people. And he's very lucky he didn't. So from that point on, it's now the next era of West Virginia men's basketball. It's been a while since we've been in this limbo, and it feels that we kind of could have maybe seen it coming after the whole Xavier radio incident. However, now it's here and now it's arrived. And so there's a lot of things that go into this, right? There's are we going to carry on Hugs's coaching legacy with someone who was on his staff, with someone who was on his staff previously, but now is a head coach elsewhere? Or are we going to completely turn the page, shut off Hugs from West Virginia men's basketball and look elsewhere? And with that, there's also the idea of you had a really talented roster, top to bottom, for this upcoming season. And you could see a lot of those guys now walk out the door, which people paid big money for. That's no secret. People rolled out the bag for some of these guys and their name, image, and likeness deals. And here we are at a spot where we don't know who's going to possibly stay. And some guys could stay for one coach and leave for others. And so you're kind of facing a short-term decision with this team based off a long-term decision of wanting to have another Hugs-esque run with someone. And so it's kind of hard to exactly draw the line at what you want to happen if you're Ren Baker. And that's probably the whole dilemma in all of this is, what do you value more, or what do you think you can try and mix of the short-term versus long-term success?
Absolutely. I think in his first year on the job, I feel like Ren Baker has been put in such a hard position because of the recent mistakes of Bob Huggins. I do believe that they didn't clash and they had a pretty good relationship, but regardless, Huggins put Baker in kind of two bad situations. But if you listen to he had an interview with Tony Caridi and the guys with three guys before the game, and he kind of talked, and this was before the DUI. This was after the radio comments, but before the DUI. So at this point, Huggins' job was safe. They made the decision, we're going to run it back with Hugs at this point for the next year. But he had talked about having a list of coaches, even if for any sport, even if your coach is, what you think to be a lockdown coach, you don't think you're going to have to get rid of him. You don't think he's going to retire. But for any sport, he has a list of coaching candidates. If something were to happen, if somebody were to retire, if something bad were to happen, or if somebody needed to get removed from their position. So I do have faith in that, but there's going to be, if you make one decision, guys could leave. But if you make another one with Hugs ties with a guy like Andy Kennedy from UAB or Jared Calhoun from Youngstown State, there's speculation that guys might stay, but nobody knows. That's the thing.
Yeah, you bring up Andy Kennedy and Jared Calhoun. So let's talk about a couple of these guys that have been rumored to at least be in talks with the athletic department and the higher ups at WVU. Andy Kennedy, he's the first name that probably everyone thought of as soon as Hugs got fired. I know I thought of him. I know many others thought of him, and simple fact is he's the head coach at UAB right now. Everyone knows this. West Virginia's played UAB each of the last 2 years. Andy Kennedy and Hugs' relationship has been brought up each time they have played. But he's had success. He was an assistant under Hugs at Cincinnati. He was a head coach at Ole Miss. He took them to a couple of NCAA tournaments, won the SEC 1 year, got them ranked, and kind of helped bring back the Ole Miss basketball program. And then he's obviously done an incredible job at UAB. He's had talented guys like Jelly Walker there, and he's been able to win there. Then you have Jared Calhoun, head coach at Youngstown State. He was at WVU from 2007 to 2012. Obviously, he was around that Final Four team. He was director of basketball ops at WVU for 4 of those years, and then was an assistant for 1. He went on to Fairmont State, and then hasn't had the best record at Youngstown State, but everyone's saying he's done a great job for the situation he was in at Youngstown State. So those are 2 of the names. There's also Pat Kelsey's name being thrown around. He's the head coach at University of Charleston down there in South Carolina, and they had a great year this past year, and he's done marvelous things there. So those are 3 names, just obviously 3 names that are outside of the program. Then there's obviously the 2 names that you keep hearing a lot about, and Josh Eilert and Ron Everhart inside the program. There's also DeMar Johnson. I don't think DeMar Johnson would get promoted here for his first head coaching role. He was just named to the staff, like 6 months ago, it feels like. So I think if you stay internal, it's going to be Everhart or Eilert. And then I honestly think one of those 3 is probably one of your best chances if you're looking outside the program. Ben McCullum is another name that's been thrown around, but he's at a Division II school in Northwest Missouri State, and going from that to the Big 12 and having to go to Allen Fieldhouse, I just don't see that jump being made when you're following up a dude like Hugs.
Yeah, it would be tough to do that. And that's why, as maybe from a fan's perspective or a student's perspective, I just really like the resume of Andy Kennedy. Obviously ties to Huggins, like you said, he was an assistant for him at Cincinnati. He took over as the interim head coach at Cincinnati after Hugs' departure. What I like about him is his success now. He's 78-25 at UAB, but I like his success in a Power 5 conference. And I don't think Ole Miss is known to be some kind of basketball powerhouse. Maybe they'll get back up with Chris Beard. But I like that he took them to an SEC tournament championship. To be honest with you, I didn't even know until doing some research that Ole Miss ever won an SEC tournament. So I like his body of work. But like you said, Jared Calhoun is well-liked and well-respected. And I guess for what he was thrown in at Youngstown State, he's done the job just fine. And what I like about Calhoun is that when he was the coach at Fairmont State, a young Joe Mazzulla was there. And as we know, Mazzulla played for Hugs and has worked his way all the way up to being the head coach of the Boston Celtics. But what I saw is that he credits a lot of his coaching abilities and knowledge and early knowledge he got from being the main assistant for Calhoun. He credits Calhoun with a lot of his success. So obviously, it would be easy to speculate that going this route with one of the two people that are connected with Hugs would help the program, help keep some of the NIL and some of the donors engaged and involved and excited. But it's tough to speculate because we're not those donors and we're not inside that program, and nobody really knows where those donors will want to go. I know there's some that really were just keyed in on Hugs and they had their belief in Hugs and this roster. And now that he's gone, it's hard to tell what people will do.
Yeah, going back to the Andy Kennedy point, Ole Miss has made the NCAA tournament 3 times since 2002. Twice that was under Andy Kennedy. So just to kind of get a grasp of what he did there at that program, and possibly what he could be able to do, because as you say, there is a financial part to all of this. As everyone knows, money always talks, and there's multiple ways it's talking in this case, and let's break that down. So what I mean, one is obviously there's the NIL component. Really, you don't need much else said about that besides fans have to support the program through Country Roads Trust, through that collective, and if they have a belief in the program, they're probably going to give more money, and you could more than likely get better players that way. There's also the second part of it where it's just outside donors and boosters still support this program. And if they are unhappy with the man at the top of the program, they're going to be unhappy and not as willing, obviously, to write those checks for the program. And if there is a overwhelming consensus that they want a Hugs guy, I would guess they're going to get a Hugs guy. I'm not saying it's right and it's best that they have as some control, or that people with money in any of these coaching situations have control over the hire. I'm just saying the reality of it is the status quo has been Bob Huggins, and if you change that, it's got to be a home run hire, because if not, you're going to lose everyone that was already invested. And there's been some high level investment. If you could not tell from this last offseason, there's a high level investment in the Hugs belief. And I have a feeling if Hugs does not back this, even behind closed doors, then that person will not be hired. I'm not saying that's the right thing. I'm not saying that's the best thing. I'm just saying that's how I see it in this whole situation.
Yeah, and I would have to agree with you. And if for some reason somebody did get hired, like Kelsey out of College of Charleston, or the Furman head coach, or the other man you mentioned from Division II, if Ren Baker would pull that trigger and make that gigantic move, the NIL support, let's just face it, would probably not be there, especially with people that are intertwined with Bob Huggins and have been close to him and know him for years and decades. I just don't see the support being there, and I could see players like Kirk Creesa, maybe Jesse Edwards, Raekwon Battle, departing the program because maybe their aforementioned deals or contracts, maybe if those NIL donors kind of back off, maybe those don't get fulfilled and they want to take their talents elsewhere. So it's hard to tell, but I mean, I couldn't fault Ren Baker for hiring a guy like Kennedy, because that's your best chance of keeping those guys that you got because of NIL and because they wanted to play for Coach Hugs. But there's also a body of work there that, WVU fans, even if he wasn't intertwined with Hugs, you can say, okay, this is probably a pretty good hire. He's a good current day coach. He's succeeding at his level, and he has succeeded at the Power 5 level. For me, that would give me some internal rest. If you go Calhoun, it's more of a prove it for me, even though he's intertwined with Coach Hugs because of his kind of 96-96 record at Youngstown State. I know it's not the best situation, it's not ideal, but I would feel more at ease with Kennedy, but that's just the fan in me coming out a little bit.
Yeah, for me though, what I'll say is what I am personally in favor of, and we'll get into this and then we'll look at the roster here and talk about that. But personally, I'm in favor of going the internal route. I think you should promote Eilert, keep this staff together, and prioritize this year. And I say that for a couple reasons. The first is there's already been such a large commitment to this roster. It would suck if you don't see that through because of this. And if they're telling you that they will see this through if you stay with who's already here, I don't see why you don't do that. Secondly, let's look around the country, right? What happened at Texas last year? Rodney Terry came in, took them to an Elite Eight, won the Big 12 tournament. After the whole Chris Beard stuff happened middle of the year. Look around at places like Duke, hired from within. North Carolina, hired from within. Villanova, hired from within. So you have all these places around the country that have gone down the bench and not outside the building. And while Andy Kennedy and Jared Calhoun might be somewhat close to being a Huggins guy down the bench, they still haven't been here in a decade. They still haven't been here in 20 years, depending on which guy it is. So I think your best bet is to put all your chips in on this year team, see what they can do under a guy like Eilert, and then revisit this come March, come April, when you'll probably be the best job available and you'll probably have a lot more candidates to choose from.
Yeah, you make a good point, and I can't disagree with that. I don't know if I see it happening with this program. I know Eilert has been here since I think 2007 when Hugs got here. He's really only been an assistant coach for a year. Everhart is pretty up there in age, and Hugs' main assistant Larry Harrison was just let go. Eric Martin just went to South Carolina State. I'm not sure if I see it happening, but if it did happen and you go Eilert or Everhart, I don't think I would be mad with that. And I do see your point in saying that the roster is more likely to stick together with guys that they played for last year, especially the guys like Seth Wilson, Trey Mitchell, Joe Toussaint, on down that line that know these guys, trust these coaches, love these coaches. And obviously the guys coming in like Edwards, Battle, Creasa, Silverio. I guess you don't really know with those guys because they didn't play a whole year with Eilert and the staff and all that. But if they were to go the interim route, I would be okay with that because of stories like Rodney Terry and Mark Adams taking over for Chris Beard and Duke and UNC. There's guys that can coach that don't get their chance to be a head coach for years. Mark Adams, for instance, I know that situation didn't end incredibly well, but he didn't really get a chance up until he was in his 60s, and he can really coach. So you never know with a guy like Everhart or Eilert, who hasn't gotten their chance. Everhart hasn't gotten a chance in over 20 years, and Eilert has never had a chance at the D1 level to be a head coach. So you never know. I wouldn't be mad with that, but I don't know if I see it happening.
But just counterpoint here, and hear me out, is as we said, there's money is such a big player in this, right? Say you go outside and get an Andy Kennedy or a Jared Calhoun or whoever it may be, and they're going to not be here on a 1-year basis. They are going to be sign a deal, and they're going to be your coach, hopefully for the next decade plus, right? If you lose this top end talent, you're going to suffer come January and February. And will there be growing pains with that? Yes. However, will there still be as much of a financial commitment if this team struggles in year one of a new head coach because the top end talent left? That's my only pushback there, is that if you are Andy Kennedy, and you come in here and let's say you lose 3 or 4 of those guys. And then you go from possibly being a top 4 team in a very large and good Big 12 to being a middle of the road bottom feeder. You're the 10, 12 seed in the Big 12 tournament and you don't make it to March, right? Then what? That's the big question in all this. I think ideally, best case scenario, you keep the roster intact, you find your long-term guy. I just don't know if those two will be able to go hand in hand. From the sounds of it, it sounds like Andy Kennedy is the best option to do so. However, you just don't know until you know.
Yeah, you're right. I think this is just such unprecedented territory. This is just such a unique situation, and I think things that have happened or things that have happened or not happened over the last 48 hours show me that maybe if you get Kennedy or Calhoun, then maybe you don't lose everybody, because nobody has transferred as of yet. And I know the big sell for some of these guys, or most of these guys, all of these guys, is to come in and play for a Hall of Fame coach. It's how you got, I mean, as along with the NIL, that's how you get guys like Creasa and Edwards and Battle, because they want to play for a top tier coach, the most active wins in college basketball. And nobody has transferred up to this point. And another kind of kicker is that some of your best talent would have to get a waiver, even with this 30-day period for West Virginia players to transfer. Guys like Jose Perez, Omar Silverio, Raekwon Battle started at Washington, then Montana State, and I believe another, would all have to apply for waivers to get out. Obviously, the guys that haven't transferred, and Jesse Edwards, who's only transferred once, and Kirk Creasa, they could go, and maybe you lose them. But maybe if you hire a guy like Kennedy and lose a couple, but keep some of those guys, maybe you can build something in year one, and you don't have to wait for a couple years. Because look at Creasa and Battle, for example. I mean, these two guys were in the West Coast, and they just made their move. They signed on to get probably a substantial bag here, and they literally just made the move. They were just in practice last week for their first week, coming from Montana and Arizona, and Chris is from Estonia. You just settle in and you're going to go somewhere else. It's really tough. And if they can get boosters and donors to keep their financial, you know, whatever the word I'm looking for is, their financial commitment, then if I'm Crease or Battle, it's tough for me to leave because I just got to the East Coast. So maybe if you make the right hire, then maybe you don't lose everybody. Maybe you lose just a couple, and you can still get a top talented team in the Big 12 this year.
Yeah, just from what the research I have done, the dudes who are new who can leave, Jesse Edwards can leave. I think Silverio can leave, because they are considered grad transfers. And then I think Creasa, Battle, and Perez would all be in the same situation that Jose found himself in last summer, where you're going to need a waiver for the new school.
And what about Trey Mitchell, where he started at
So
UMass, went to Texas?
Trey is in a kind of a weird spot. He's considered a grad transfer. He'd be able to get around the rule. I believe the rule is like you have to, if you're going to do it, you have to go the way he's at, because he's transferred twice. If he's a grad transfer and he leaves, he has to do it a way where there's an academic offering that West Virginia doesn't have, but that's not hard to do, I would assume.
Right.
So,
Right.
personally, if I had to guess, I think Trey stays. I think it's pretty, just because of his family being in Pittsburgh. He's been here. He only has 1 year left. Hard to kind of realign yourself with the new program. And we're 10 days from July. With that being said, though, we don't really know, right? So it's kind of a waiting game. The 30-day period has started. And I think that's also another move for Ren, where you've got to do something, because if your guys leave, then you're also having to find new guys when the portal's closed,
It's June.
um,
Yeah.
and all that. So there's a lot of layers to this, and we're at a place where it's just a kind of wait and see what's next.
Right. I do believe that a move is going to be made here in the next. I really think the next couple of days, 48 hours. Baker's had his list. I'm sure he's caught off by some of the circumstances, but he's a prepared man. And I believe a move is going to get made soon. And we'll probably have to come back here for another episode and just to kind of weigh in all the stuff that's going on. I'm sure if a hire is made that maybe the players don't like, within 24 hours of that hire, we're going to see people transferred, or maybe not. And we're probably going to have to run this back. But I think a decision is going to be coming soon. And anxious would be the word I would describe this. This time I'm ready for news because I feel like
you just want that level of
Yeah.
clarity. You just want to know what's going to happen, and obviously we don't. I would hope it gets done in the next week or so. Like you can't take another, like, time is your worst enemy right now, right? Because either way, there's going to be roster reconstruction that'll probably have to happen. You're either going to have to figure out how to keep guys, or you're going to have to replace guys. And it's June 20th, and we are like 4 months away from actual meaningful basketball. So it's go time here if you're West Virginia and Ren Baker. So Aaron, I kind of spoke on what I would do. I think I would go the interim route with Eilert or Everhart. What would you do if you were in the situation and you could kind of have the control here?
That's a tough question. Because I think as from a student or a follower of this program's perspective, you just want to keep everybody. You want to keep this top transfer class. You want to keep the high flyer in battle who can shoot and dunk. You want to keep Edwards, who's a premier big man that can block shots and rebound at a high level. And you want to keep Kirk Reese, who's the number one point guard in the country. And you have players to build off from last year. Seth Wilson, Trey Mitchell was probably the Mountaineers' second best player last year. Toussaint was an incredible player off the bench. You got so much to build off of, and to keep the roster, the thought would be to go Eilert or Everhart. But I think for the future of this program, I would go Andy Kennedy. The wins and losses mean too much to me. 344 and 194 as a head coach. He's been there, done that. He's 55 years old, but in my opinion, he's not. He's not too old for the job to where like you can't really see a ceiling past 5 or 6 years, because either the game's going to pass him by or health issues will come up. I don't think he's in that boat. There's connections there. I believe some of the donors at least will keep their commitments with Kennedy because they trust him, and they know and love Hugs, and Hugs knows and loves and trusts Kennedy so much that he took his squad down to Birmingham to play them just 2 years ago. I would go Kennedy, but like I said earlier, with your point on Eilert or Everhart to keep the roster intact, I don't think I'd be too upset about that.
In fairness to your point on Kennedy being 55, Hugs is going to turn 70 this year. So run that back 15 years when he first got here. That's about 55. So your point, well heard. It's now just a kind of wait and see. What will Ren Baker do? The spotlight is on him, magnifying glass on him, if he wanted it or not. Just a little over 6 months into this thing. So I'm Wesley Shoemaker, joined by Aaron Parker. Be sure to keep it locked with BlueGoldSports.com, as well as follow us on Twitter for all the latest news and updates. We will be sure to get you some sort of podcast whenever we do have information. So we appreciate you listening if you made it this far, and this is the Blue Gold Sports Podcast.